So, welcome. This is the last in the series of our pastoral care modules. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what we've learned about how we care for ourselves and think a little bit more about how that connects to our caring for others. There's something really important in our sense of boundaries and self-care, of being self-aware, prayerful, aware of God and aware of ourselves. What really are our motivations? And what are we gaining from what we're doing? So it's very important. I'll just make this a proper slideshow. Of course, pastoral care is risky. We do take risks in pastoral care. They should be controlled and they should be managed. I guess this guy jumping backwards off a rock knows, because he's got wet hair, that the water's deep enough for him to jump into, that he knows that nothing is in the way. So it's a risk, but it's a risk that's calculated, and that we know that we've done as much as we can to reduce the risk. I don't think we can ever remove the risk, which is at the heart of ministry. But yeah, we need to be really sensible about ourselves, keep ourselves safe, and to keep other people safe. So how is it that you're going to do that? You need to trust in the Holy Spirit, who's the midwife of change. I think where the Holy Spirit comes, there's some risk, but it might not be just risk to ourselves. And I think it's really important to keep remembering that Jesus sent out his disciples in pairs. And maybe we take fewer risks when we do things for somebody else rather than we doing them on our own. And we really have to ask our motivation for wanting to do things by ourselves. Is it because we want to be a hero? And maybe it's good to work with somebody else. And I really want to think about the boundaries. You've all done safeguarding. We need to think about the place where we meet somebody. Who knows where you are? Who knows when you leave that place? And it might be that you set up a system with an administrator or with somebody else in your parish to say, so you say where you're going, or leave it written on a piece of paper on your desk. And if it's something you're at all concerned about, to text somebody on your way in and maybe on your way out. And have codes. So if you phone someone up and say, well, we're having lasagna for tea, that might mean something, that you're in danger. So really think hard about that, because there's a lot of time in ministry that we work on our own, and off we pop to see somebody and nobody knows where we are and what time we're due back. Are you going to meet in your house? Are you going to meet in someone else's house? Are you going to meet in a public place? And we've got put this picture of Starbucks coffee on Acorn Road in Jesmond, because when I was a curate, I did most of my meeting of people in Starbucks. It was private and it was public. And the people in the parish could see me working. They could see who I was with, but they couldn't hear me. Sometimes, of course, people want to talk to you about something. They don't want people to know that they've met you, so you've got to think a little bit hard. But I quite liked these sort of public places. If somebody comes to meet me in my home, I make sure there is somebody else somewhere in the house. So if I were to live on my own, I'd go somewhere else, or I'd visit someone in a third place. How's the arrangement of the furniture, of the lighting? I'd say keep it light and bright. I think the middle picture of chairs facing each other is a bit formal, but it might work. Or chairs slightly at an angle so you get a chance to look outside. Look elsewhere. The dress of the minister, what is it that you're wearing? There's a kind of uniform for vicars, and I think the uniform has a purpose in that it detracts from us and talks about what our role is. So think really hard about what you're wearing. Does it get in the way of what you're doing? And if it does, maybe you need to think again. I, as a curate again, spent one PCC with some man looking at my legs throughout, and I didn't dress like that again. I wear trousers most of the time in ministry now, because I wasn't going to give him that opportunity, and I thought it was inappropriate. So I needed to manage that myself. Visiting and being visited alone, I think some of that is inevitable, but we've got to be really careful about that, being in a house for somebody else. Know yourself and know where the door is. Sorry, in the visiting and being visited alone, know where the door is. I think you need to sit without any barriers between you and the door. And just be aware of that. Know yourself and your needs. So what are your boundaries? Where do you need to be? What are the things that are on your time or in your place? That's really important for you to keep hold of. How do you know the time? I think time is a boundary as well that we need to think really carefully about. If you've got an hour to see somebody, you need to be able to see a clock. That isn't your watch. Look at me, looking at my watch. I can't do that. I can't do it subtly. Trying my very hardest. I've spent years trying to look at my watch subtly, thinking, oh, I wish I could see this. So how do you know what time it is? You probably need a clock in front of you that you could flick your eyes up to and just see what time it is. So if you have a room where you meet people, maybe you want a clock, in a couple of places, so that you always know what time it is. So you manage the time. That's one of the boundaries. And I would say end the conversation 10 minutes before you need to, because a lot of the important stuff happens at the end. So allow space for that stuff at the end. Oh, by the way, this is what I really wanted to say. I think it's perfectly all right to be clear about your boundaries, about where you'll meet, and about what time you've got. I think you can be in charge of that in quite a lot of situations. If you meet someone in the supermarket, you can do that as well. Hello, it's very nice. Oh yes, I'm just on my way to, and you know that, and then you can spend another 5 minutes saying, I'm sorry, I've got to go now. But you can give someone some time, as long as you know, as long as they kind of know that's how much time you've got. That beginning and ending conversations is part of looking after others. How do you begin and how do you end? So you can begin quite with some focus. This is why we're here. This is what we want to talk about. What did you want to talk about? And ending conversations keeps them safe. The place where the conversations is held is also part of your responsibility for keeping people safe. So there's a public thing, but there's also something quite private. And that's important. You're not a counsellor, you're not a psychotherapist, actually some of you are, but making referrals is really important, because you're meeting someone, even if you are actually, you're meeting someone as a pastoral carer, and that's not the same relationship, boundaried relationship, but you can make referrals and pass people on. So we're going to say something about signposting later on. It's really important for you to seek supervision. So none of you for the next few years will be in ministry without supervision, and it's really important to seek supervision, to ask for somebody. You can talk about a situation without naming the person, so you really can. I've got a spiritual director, I've got a work mentor, so there are people you can go to check things out. When I was in Durham, and I don't know here, but I imagine it's true here, the bishop said, if there's something you really need to talk about, because it's a problem you don't know how to resolve, you can go to him. So there are people that you can ring and say, I need some supervision because I'm dealing with a problem that's too hard for me. I'm listening to a problem that's too hard for me. What should I do? What advice should I give? What's my next move, really? Keep to the guidelines. That's about the professional conduct of clergy. I think even people that aren't clergy, so anyone in ministry, should be looking at those professional guidelines for clergy. Know what the limits are to confidentiality and make it clear. There's a safeguarding issue there, and you'll know the safeguarding issue. There also might be issues because you're part of a team, and I'll need to share this with the rest of the team. Is it okay if I share this with the rest of the team? If you feel you're being pulled into something that you're not comfortable with, take somebody with you the next time. That's not breaking any confidences, but it's having somebody next to you. I had a situation as a curate where somebody wanted to tell me secrets about the vicar and kept pulling me in. And in the end, I had to take somebody with me, and then she could choose what she said. She wasn't very happy with it. But I didn't want to be pulled into her secret because it put me in a really difficult position, and it was a kind of game playing. So I'll talk about that triangulation later on. So really think about that. How are you going to not be sucked into somebody telling you the secrets, which is a form of game playing, or somebody just giving you confidences about themselves, and how much of that do you need to share with your ministry team or your vicar? So really think hard about that and work it out. It's with curates, it's something I ask about as they're drawing the learning working agreement. What you're going to agree to share here. So there are limits to confidentiality. I don't think that limit is going home and telling your wife or your husband or your girlfriend about what you've heard today. And sometimes, yeah, and I think that's really important. They might need to know where you are, where you've been, but I don't think they need to know what you've been talking about at all. There needs to be another place for that. If you need to talk about it, you need to find another safe place for that. Look after yourself. Know what or who supports you, and make sure you use these. Where is it you get your support? When you're in ministry and you're busy, it's really easy to forget where your support comes from. And if it's through friendships, the friendships won't survive on their own. Friendships need to be worked on. So you need to allow time for your support networks. That's really very important. Make sure you use them. Make sure you refer to those people that support you. Establish your own boundaries. If you don't take phone calls during meal times, let the phone ring during meal times. You know, we've got all sorts of systems of answer phones and emails, and somebody can get a message through to you. My rule was, if a phone rang 3 times during a meal, I picked it up on the 3rd time, because I reckoned someone was desperate to get hold of me. Same on my nights, or Friday nights and Saturday nights in the parish. If I was at home and not working, I let the phone ring. Sometimes I'd stand next to the answer phone and listen to the message. But I think it's really important to let the phone ring. People will ring you to get in touch with you. So emails you don't need to look at when you're not at work. So what are those boundaries? When is it you're going to switch your mobile off and not take text messages? You know, when's the last time people can phone you? And they'll get used to that if you keep your boundaries. This is my day off, and I won't talk to you on your day off. I'm really pleased when I hear somebody say it's Vicar's day off on Friday and you'll not get hold of him or her. I think that's great, because that's how your day off should be. Know your own responsibilities, and how will you decide on your priorities? That's part of looking after yourself. What is it that you need to do, and how do you prioritize that sensibly and within a time frame? And listen to yourself. What are your needs? What are your motivations? That's really important. Why is it that you're doing this? Why are you spending so much time on that? And what is it that you need now? When I was in the parish and I got really tired, I knew not to go and visit other people, because I knew what I wanted. I knew my boundaries went, and I started to talk about myself, and it was inappropriate. So on really tired days, I couldn't do pastoral visiting. And that might be true for you as well. So really think about what you're needing today and what it is you need to do. I referred earlier to the guidelines for the professional conduct of the clergy, which you can Google and find as a PDF. I think they're useful for everybody in ministry. The aims are to ensure the welfare and protection of individuals and groups with whom the clergy work, to ensure the welfare and the protection of the clergy and their families, to encourage the clergy to aspire to the highest possible standard of conduct, to provide safe and effective boundaries for clerical ministry, to encourage personal and corporate ministerial development. So if you haven't looked at those guidelines yet, I would really suggest that you look at them. Lots of clergy seem not to know about them. And remember, there is a clergy disciplinary measure. So, you know, we do have this professional conduct that we need to stick to. I also think we need to be a little bit self-critical in our care and of ourselves. Of course, being self-critical may make us critical of others that we see as having the same fault as we have, or even being worse than we are. So we see our faults, sometimes we see the fault that we should see in ourselves in other people first and not acknowledge it. So we've got to be careful about that. Being self-critical may make us defensive and determined not to let others see our faults. Maybe not to get to know us. Being self-critical may make us self-preoccupied, unconfident, and unwilling to have a go at doing things for fear of failure. When we talk about the drama triangle, we can hear, is that the persecutor's voice deep down, or is that a voice from our childhood deep down that criticizes us and paralyzes us? Yet, on the other hand, we've got to be self-aware enough to take the log out of our own eye. So there's two sides to this. Here, these two sides. It's really important to be self-aware and self-critical enough of ourselves to know what our motivations are, to know where our faults are, to know where we might damage others. But on the other hand, we can be so self-critical that it paralyzes us and turns us actually into a persecutor ourselves. As we become more aware of our weaknesses, we can become bullies in order to hide those weaknesses, really. So we've got to be really careful about that. You know, we can minister out of our vulnerability. That's really important. So once we see our vulnerability and acknowledge it before God, we can do so before others. And so be aware. This pastoral ministry really depends on our level of self-awareness, not on our perfection, but on our awareness and therefore our vulnerability. So some questions for you after this little section, which I think it's been about 15 minutes. Do you keep alert to your own failings, bringing them to God? How well do you know where your own temptations lie in the use of your time? Looking through your diary, is there a balance of time for God, time to rest, and time to plan and think? Thinking is doing too. And where do you find pastoral wisdom? So I'm going to move on to the second half of what I want to say in this session, having left those questions which you might get to discuss at the session. I'm going to talk a little bit about systems theory and Bowen's family systems triangle. This isn't the same as the drama triangle. I think the drama triangle grew out of this, was published about 10 years later than this. So this is Bowen's family systems theory, and it's about triangles. So I don't know if you'll be able to see my mouse moving. So the ideal relationship is a dyad. It's two people. So there's one person here at the bottom of the triangle and another person here at the other side of the triangle. So this is a dyadic relationship. And And that's the simplest sort of relationship with two people. However, it can rarely withstand stress. So when there's stress in this relationship, the stress usually means that a third party, there's the triangle, is brought into the system somehow. So let me give you an example, because these things happen so much in ministry. If this is a PCC member and a vicar and another PCC member, it can be easy at the end of a PCC meeting that nobody's spoken, and these two people together collude in talking about how terrible the vicar is. They solidified their relationship in talking together about the problem, and the vicar is excluded. So that's the deal. These two people bring their relationship a bit closer. They're not talking about the relationship, though, notice. They're talking about the vicar, and they exclude the vicar. And that's where it becomes dangerous. And this can be a hugely depressing moment of being excluded from a triangle. It can happen with parents too, and I think I might be guilty of this, where my husband and I, rather than talking about our own relationship and sorting things out, talk about our son, who we think is problematic, and by doing that, we kind of create a bond together where we're thick as thieves, and he becomes the victim. Although we might be talking about him as if he's a persecutor, but he becomes left out. So in his left outness, he might create a new triangle. He might find somebody outside this with whom to triangulate. Can you see that? So he might find somebody over here to make a triangle with. My mother is terrible. There's that. So he's making a triangle which excludes this person here. And it happens in all sorts of relationships. And Bowen thinks it's a real key to how people get on together, this systems theory triangle. It's not quite the drama triangle, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's about this bringing third person in when there's even moderate levels of tension from this basic thing at the bottom. When there's moderate levels of tension, you bring a third person in. And of course, this outsider, and then there's an outsider in, and the outsider might work to become one with one of the insiders and make somebody else the outsider. So it's not static. This moves around quite a lot. Who's insider or who's outsider? And there's building, and there'll be built triangles all the way around. So it could be that as you look at your church, what you see is a series of triangles. Where there's people talking about another person leaving them out, and they go and talk about somebody else and leave them out, and there's no real accountability, and there's no real obvious open speaking about it. Just let me look at my notes to see what more I have to say about it. It reflects anxiety. Anxious people draw others into their disputes. So a triangle can only work on a relationship that you're part of. So it's really easy to be sucked into a triangle, much easier to say when A talks to you about B, you need to talk to B directly rather than involving me. And that makes them responsible for themselves, and it stops that triangle forming. Maintain a sense of humor. Don't be anxious about it. This is a triangle of anxiety, and anxiety only leads to more anxiety. So be calm. Be in touch with these people, but don't join in the game. Stay on track. Avoid secrets. I've said that before. I think secrets are really damaging. If someone tells you a secret, it's not the same as telling you something in confidence, and especially when it's a secret about somebody else. that puts you, that brings you alongside them in a real discomfort. So there'll be some real anxiety here as you triangulate against the person against whom the secret is. So watch out for secrets, because this is a real basic thing about interaction, not just in families, but with everybody. And you can see triangles forming in and out of triangles. Where do the triangles get built up? And I think it's really important not to allow that to happen. These are some notes that I found. When an elephant fights, it's the grass that gets crushed, not the elephant. So we have to be really careful that we don't let elephants fight. You know, a triangle exists when you experience the following. The reactivity being expressed towards you is excessive, strong, and far beyond what might be normal. So what might be going on is that you're experiencing the being the outsider of the triangle. Somebody is over-focused on you, so the focus becomes on the outsider rather than on the two insiders. Or you look for a sympathetic third person who'll share your irritation with an adversary. Fred's making me cross, and I go and complain to Marjorie about how terrible Fred is. I think that happens a lot. That's a triangulation. Instead of me dealing properly with my relationship with Fred, I take it elsewhere. That's the same as that turn to a second party to talk about a third party. You're creating a triangle. You become allied with a friend against your friend's opponent. Yeah, so your friend brings you into a triangle, a bit like that. Your friend Marjorie comes to tell you about how terrible Fred is, and you can join with Marjorie talking about Fred. You need to care for your friend when he or she is anxious. That turns into the drama triangle. You can see how the drama triangle evolved from this. You pin your anxiety on someone to relieve tension that belongs to another relationship. Again, that's avoiding the real relationship, that dyad, and you're pinning the tension from that dyad somewhere else. So I just want you to just take a minute as I'm talking to think about what those triangles might look like in your church and how you might avoid them. Because I think they really undermine relationships. Then we come to The Drama Triangle by Stephen B. Cartman. I think it was published in 1969, and he produced this document, which you can find online if you're keen, Fairy Tales and Script Drama Analysis. It's not all about the Drama Triangle. But in it, he talks about fairy tales, and he talks about, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. So the victim are the people in the beginning, the people of Hamelin, who are being persecuted by rats. And the mayor is a rescuer and sends for the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And the Pied Piper arrives and rescues the people who have been persecuted by the rats. As he leaves, he takes the children too. And the victims, the people remain the victims, but the Pied Piper has then become the persecutor, and the mayor, then the rescuer. We could do that for all these stories. Cinderella story, the same. Cinderella's very obviously the victim. She's persecuted by the stepmother, amongst others. The prince, or the fairy godmother really, is her rescuer, and then the prince is her rescuer, and she remains a kind of victim in it. So we have to really think about what the fairy tales were. I think it's good to use the fairy tales as kind of models for how we react in life. So the persecutor is the one that wants to save. Sorry, the persecutor is the bully. the one that wants to change something or critique. You heard me talking earlier on about the persecutor being that voice in your head that says you shouldn't do it like that, you should do it like this. Whatever that persecutor is saying, you're fat, you're too thin, you're too specky, you're too whatever. And you'll have heard that persecutor's voice throughout your life, no doubt. And you might be sometimes the persecutor. I think I am. I like things to be the way I want them to be. And I think in that sense, it's easy for me to step into that role. I don't think that's a true place, though, because I think the persecutor is often somebody that's there out of their own vulnerability. There's a victim who says and keeps saying, it's always me. Why does it always happen to me? It's never my fault. I'm persecuted. There's nothing I can do to change this situation. And there's the rescuer who comes in and rescues the victim from the persecutor. See the dynamic happening here. And when does a rescuer become the persecutor? Or when does the victim become the persecutor? I suspect that a lot of people in ministry want to be the rescuer. And like Jesus themselves, the saviour of the situation, rather than leaving it up to Jesus. So I think this is a real thing that happens in ministry. There's some great notes on it from various places, and I've put something else on Moodle about it. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about these three roles. So the persecutor can be a deliberate bully, but it's more likely to become from a position of anger or a position of wanting to control, which really comes from a place of lack of confidence, hurt or shame, or fear of some kind. Whatever the reason is, the people who are persecutors, perceived as persecutors, come across as aggressive or want to fight, or they manifest as provocateurs. So we'll have seen these people in all sorts of situations, the provocateur. Victim takes a submissive role, even if there's not always an obvious persecutor present. Some people naturally take this stance. So if you start as victim, you kind of make others into the persecutor. So other people join the triangle somehow unwittingly. The victim's usually not powerless. For some people, being a victim is the only way they can control the relationship, because it's often the victim that's controlling this triangle. And you'll see that people that turn into the victim a lot really have quite a lot of control over others. And some people instinctively identify as a victim. And we do it a lot. A lot of people that work really hard turn into the victim. So you might start thinking you're a rescuer and you're working really hard, or maybe a persecutor, and you're overworking hours and hours, and eventually become victim and say, nobody cares about me, and I've worked all these hours and nobody cares. And you can see the movement in the triangle from one situation to the other. So the secret's always to be self-aware. The rescuer is the fixer, usually with a cape and a mask, and they swoop in and help the victim. They usually think they're being helpful and supportive, but often they're provoking this drama by provoking the persecutor. So in the long run, they might increase the victim's sense of helplessness, because all the victim learns is that a rescuer will rescue them rather than them learning how not to put themselves in the victim's position. It's really easy, as I said, to slip into this role of rescuer. People come to you for advice, wise counsel, and often for protection. And so you'll step into the role that the victim's asking you to play. And is this really a healthy relationship? Or is this beginning of real friendship? What's going on here? The roles are interchangeable depending on how much power we have. And we might stay in a role for as long as it serves us and then move into another role. Victims may feel that the only way out is to become more assertive, and then they themselves may become persecutors, if you can see that. Instead of being downtrodden, they're not thinking the way through this, and they're not becoming self-aware, but they kind of step into the bullying position, which comes out of their own lack of confidence. When a persecutor is challenged, especially a persecutor that's come through that cycle of victimhood, they'll easily support their own sense of victimhood. And that kind of justifies their aggression. And as I said, rescuers often start to feel that they're overworked or underappreciated, and so they become the victim. And so we keep moving around this triangle. The drama keeps going. So there's something really important to take the heat out of a drama. How do we withdraw from a triangle is really important. And I think there's two views. One is that you can't withdraw from the triangle and resolve it, and the other one is to stay in the triangle and to take the heat out of the triangle by knowing what you're doing and by asking the right questions. My tendency would be to really, if you're self-aware enough, not to be brought into the triangle in the first place. So if you think you're the victim in a situation, consider the following. Be clearer with your own personal boundaries. If you work longer and you feel disenfranchised, if you feel everyone's putting on you, think about how you're keeping those boundaries that I talked about before. When is the time for you, and when is the time for other people? Beware of the choices that bring you to this idea for victimhood. We're very rarely without choice. So we can choose not only very often where we work and where we go, but sometimes really we choose how we respond. So really be sure about the choices. If you think you're in a position of victimhood, what are the choices you're making? If you're working with somebody who's a victim, suggest to them that they've got choices. So let me give you an example of my sister was complaining that they, by the government, had shut her in her house and she wasn't allowed to go out and she wasn't allowed to see her granddaughter, and was a victim. She put herself in a victim and the government was a persecutor. And actually, she could be choosing to be there. And I said to her, do you know what? You could go and see your granddaughter. Nobody at this stage is going to stop you going anywhere. But actually, because you've got cancer, good idea for you not to go. So you can be choosing that, and then you're no longer a victim. Can you hear that? If she's aware of her own choices, there's nobody persecuting her, nobody forcing her. There are recommendations, and she can choose to follow those guidelines and protect herself or not. Suddenly, it's a much more empowered position to be in than that of being a victim. And there's something about validation. Do you have to be a victim to be validated? Do you really need that attention so much? Because a lot of people, that's a place where they get attention. Maybe you're a rescuer and constantly find yourself rescuing. And really, how do you be alongside the person that's a victim rather than rescuing them? The question to them is, so what do you think you can do about it? There's enough challenge to the victim to set about their own self-help. You'll hear all the time, you can give a man a fish every day to feed himself, but if you teach him to fish, he feeds himself. Sorry, I got that mixed up. Give a man a fish and you stop the hunger. If you teach him to fish, give him a fishing rod, he can feed himself, and that empowers him and stops him being the victim. We do that loads. I've got loads of questions about food banks. So I think it's really important to feed people that are hungry. But how do we stop ourselves having a rescuer victim scenario in that? So how is it that we help other people and be alongside other people without doing that, even inadvertently? And it's something about bringing people away from the victim and we not stepping in to be the rescuer, which is a lot of us really like that position. How do you acknowledge the persecutor's issues without engaging in the drama? Being really aware of the thin line between coaching and rescuing. And if we engage too much, we become part of it. So there's something important about acknowledging what the persecutor's doing, but not being sucked in. We need to find a way of saying no to other people's requests for help if we think that we're the rescuer, and back off from the persecutor's role. If you find yourself saying things like, I had no choice, the situation needed dealing with immediately, that's the way it works around here. All of these suggest ways of pushing, of being the persecutor and not reflecting sensibly. So aggression is rarely helpful. Exercise your compassionate side and question how you influence others. That's a really important thing to be aware of in the drama triangle. I think it's really important to be aware of the triangle because I think this plays out over and over again in our pastoral care and in our churches. I love this picture. Look at this baby. There's a bit of empathy, not moving away, staying with, but not taking on too much. To stay up the drama triangle, you need the skill sets of assertiveness, compassion, empathy, and self-awareness. By empathizing, you're unlikely to be aggressive. By being self-aware, you're less likely to rescue. By developing your assertive side, you will develop healthy boundaries and play fewer victim roles. Self-awareness is the key. So all these things I've been talking about throughout this, for yourself, but also to watch out for other people too. What I've talked about were means of conflict, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about 5 views of conflict. This is from Fraser Watts et al., and it's adapted from Kilman and Thomas. Sorry, I've lost number 1 in my notes somehow. The first one is competition, win-lose. So you want to control the outcome, you want to discourage disagreement, you want to insist on my own view. So this isn't something that competition is to be avoided. This suggests that competition is good, but there are outcomes of winners and losers. In a church situation, we can hear it when people think the Bible's on their side. The Bible's right. This is what the Bible says, so I'm right too. I've been in situations, and you may have been too, of flinging Bible passages backwards and forwards to show that you're right. There's a competition, and you'll use those Bible verses to win your competition. And how that plays out often depends on where the power is. So watch out for that one. Now, the second one is accommodation. So in accommodation, you're accepting the view of the others. Sometimes you give in, you might support, you might acknowledge your own error, you might decide it's no big deal. Excuse me. The view of conflict this is expressing is that conflict is usually disastrous. It does put relationships first, so you sacrifice your own interests. Fearful that conflict may damage the relationship, that keep the peace at any price, a high concern for relationships and a willingness to give up personal goals. I think it's this when people say you have to decide which battles to fight. Of course, in some situations, and you'll have seen PCCs working like this, that people give in. People do this, it's no big deal, rather than expressing themselves, especially if they're sitting next to somebody who's competitive and wants to win. So we've got to be a bit careful that in this conflict, because it doesn't look like conflict, does it? This person that's accommodating is doing their best to avoid any sort of conflict. Of course, it can seem like a nice Christian attitude. Let's all be nice. We're all being good to others. Other people are more important than myself. We've got to please others to be accepted. Other people are always right. We need to sacrifice ourselves. And sometimes, of course, that is a virtue, but not always, because it can lead to the conflict not being addressed and just allowed to continue. The next one is avoidance. This is to delay or avoid response, to withdraw, to be inaccessible, to divert attention. So somebody that's really trying to avoid conflict, you can't get hold of. And that's a common thing that happens in parish life, that the vicar just can't get hold of somebody who's in conflict with them because they've made themselves inaccessible. This view is that conflict's hopeless and avoid it. It overlooks differences. And it's about not being able to accomplish personal goals or preserve the relationship through the conflict. So in this one, the relationship isn't even being preserved. Avoidance can appear peace-loving and virtuous, but at other times, church battles are not worth fighting. They drain energy and time. Avoidance, anti-conflict may be the safest option. So there's two things there, isn't there? That just sometimes it's just not worth it, and it needs to be avoided. Yeah, but actually it could be cowardice. So we've got to really think about where the wisdom is in dealing with that sort of conflict. Compromise is an urge of moderation, a bargain, find a little something for everyone, meet them halfway. You know, that kind of decision by committee where nobody really wins and nobody actually gets what they want. But it's pretty good, isn't it? This is a resolution between cooperation and compromise. We can't get everything we want in a conflict, so there's something a bit democratic about everybody going halfway. And you're pushing for some of your goals, but you're still keeping the relationship high. This is high relationship, this compromise. Relationship's still important. I want to get some of what I want, and so there's a bit of bargain and people are moving. Compromise can really work well in church situations to allow democratic forms of government, but in other situations there may be a moral compromise. So we've got to think really hard about that. Collaboration is win-win. So you assert your own views while you invite others to assert theirs. You welcome difference, don't avoid difference, identify the main concerns and generate options. So you have a conversation, you have some disagreement, there's some difference of opinion, and you identify the main concerns. Where are the areas of difference most, and generate options for that, and then search for a solution that meets as many concerns as possible. We can see that this is just a brilliant way of working, this collaborative way. This presumes that conflict is natural and neutral and normal, and that differences can be affirmed, relationships can continue even where there are differences. It recognizes intentions in the relationships and the contrasts and viewpoints, but it assumes both parties can achieve their goals in the situation and it works towards it. High concern for the accomplishment of goals, high concern for a relationship. In a church context, church norms that equate conflict with sin may militate against the ability to collaborate. Collaborate means experiencing the pain of conflict before peace can become a reality. So it's part of a journey towards working well with other people. I'm not doing a whole thing on conflict resolution here, but I thought it was really important to acknowledge that there is conflict and some of how we are. I wonder where you are on those 5 views, and it might be different in different circumstances. And just thought it was important to flag that up. I've got some questions for you about conflict in church. What's been your experience of conflict in church? I've been in churches where there's been some real nasty conflict. I was on the PCC 20 years ago, 25 years ago, where the vicar painted the church door he did several things without faculty. And when he applied for faculty, somebody in the church objected to it, and the church completely fell out and was taken to consistory court, not once but twice. The cost, the financial cost was huge. and the cost in terms of relationships in the church were huge. Now, by some divine intervention, I ended up being associate minister, partly in that church in my last role. That was 25 years later, and the hurts were still there that hadn't been healed. So that was huge conflict in church, and the story was still there. So, which of the following factors played an important part in the conflict? An expectation that church should be conflict-free and perfect, a leadership style that didn't allow confrontation or any discussion of the problems, my own responses to conflict. So, do I do flight or fight? The chosen conflict resolution style didn't match the situation. The conflict spiraled out of control and no mediator was brought in, or all of the above. So sometimes there really is a need for a mediator in a situation. There's just a couple more things I want to talk about before we end the module that I think is really important. This document that I put on Moodle, Stephen Patterson's, is Pastoral Care, Dead in a Mission-Led Church. He talks really strongly. This is 2008, so it's quite a long time ago. 12 years, talks about mission being the word for the church and not pastoral care. And he argues that pastoral care is very important, even in a mission-led church. This is what we do. Read this. If properly undertaken, it's an essential part of God's mission to the world and to Christian religiosity, which, as Karl Barth might remind us, represents humanity's last stand against the inbreaking of divine grace. So pastoral theology, pastoral care is a really important part of mission. So I'm with Stephen Patterson on this, of course, and I think if we do good pastoral care to the people that we meet, we won't need to do those big evangelistic things. If we do really good care for people who are coming to us for funerals and baptisms and weddings, and really care for them and really reveal something of God and God's grace, really create the opportunities for them to meet God, I think they will. And churches will be a better place. We need to do some signposting. A lot of the time we need to do signposting. So perhaps one of the things you might do, or one of you might do, is create a list. I can't do signposting in Cumbria because I don't know it well enough. I used to be able to do signposting in the Northeast, where I began to collect people together and ideas together. Of course, you know, Charles, who is the safeguarding officer, and you know who our senior staff are in the diocese, but where are other places you would signpost. So perhaps this is a thing for conversation now or later. And one of you might be good at this because you've got a lot of experience. I suspect some of you are. And together you might collect some of the places where you might signpost people. I think that would be a really helpful thing to do. Yeah, because we can't do everything, we can't know everything, but we can point people in the right direction. Another set of questions for you. What's your learning been on this module? Where did you experience comfortable, new stuff? So this is nice, this is new, this is comfortable. Where's been your challenge? What have we done that's challenged you? And I really hope that some of this pastoral stuff has been challenging. What's just been irrelevant? And what was missing? What would you have expected to cover and you haven't covered? Let me leave you with this from Ruth Lazell again. Pastoral care should be lay, that is not professional. Corporate, that means participated in by everybody. Adventurous, that is, it takes some risk. Variegated, it has different colours, there are different shades, it's not all the same. And diffuse means spread out through the whole of society. Pastoral care is lay, corporate, adventurous, variegated, and diffuse. What are you going to do to ensure this? And let me pray this prayer by Kathy Galloway as we come to the end of this course. And I'm sorry I'm not with you for the final session of the course. It's been a good journey, and do stay in touch with me if you need to. Lord, we know that we love you. Sorry. Lord, you know that we love you, and we know that you ask us to do, and we know what you ask us to do. But for those times when we have been too busy, when we have been hard-hearted, when we have been lukewarm, we say sorry and ask your forgiving love. Prepare us for your way, O Lord. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Lord, you know our good intentions, and we know your will. But hold us back long enough to listen to those in need and to learn from them and to learn of our own need. We think we are sent, make us ready to receive. We are keen to teach, make us ready to learn. Prepare us for your way, O Lord. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Lord, you know our deepest desires, and we know the vision of your kingdom. We bring before you those elements in our lives in need of your transforming power, that which we misuse or neglect, that which we most reluctantly let go of, that which we believe is not good enough. Inspire us and disturb us to examine our deepest desires. Prepare us for your way, O Lord. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Lord, you know our potential, but what is your purpose for our lives? In our uncertainty and in the knowledge of your faithfulness, prepare us for your way, O Lord. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Amen. And I think as I end, my children are in the kitchen next door making the tea. I hope they haven't been too disturbing. This is quite a novelty. It doesn't happen every day, so I don't want to stop them. Thank you. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.